Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 Real Estate. And what's happening is it seems like topic du jour. It seems like the topic that everyone is talking about. We had a really interesting gentleman on a couple of days ago talking about Toronto real estate, and we talked about that cottage country real estate is suffering even more. And so I thought it'd be really good to check in with Holly Carroll, who's with a real estate company called The Agency. She specializes in real estate in the Muskoka areas. And so I thought it'd be interesting to check in and find out what's going on in cottage country. Holly, I'm hearing 30% or so declines in cottage country real estate. Is that right?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I'm seeing it. I'm hearing it. I'm dealing with it. And why is that? I'm sure everybody was wondering. So primarily it's because of so many people bought during the pandemic boom. One, they don't like Muskoka and cottage country as much as they thought they were going to. I can't understand why, but that lifestyle was a different lifestyle, and living here and working here is a different lifestyle for a lot of people. Two, they bought for an investment, and that investment isn't paying off as much. Not only are the prices declining, but so is the vacancy rate and how many people are actually renting up here. People now can go other places, so they're going other places. Now people are struggling because they're trying to unload their properties because interest rates went up for them. They can no longer afford it, or it just doesn't make sense for them financially. So there is a lot of listing and no buyers.
No buyers.
No buyers. I'm getting a couple buyers here and there, but I think that a lot of buyers are also a little bit afraid to pull the trigger because they're also unsure of where the interest rate's going. They're also unsure of the investment. The buyers that I have that are committed are actually committed to the lifestyle here and for the cottage lifestyle. If there are buyers out there, attention. This is a really great time to buy. I have a listing right now that is $649 on 112 feet of water frontage. This is happening all over Muskoka. That was unheard of. I am seeing this big 30%, 20 to 30% decrease, mainly on the smaller lakes. And as we talked about, Brian, last time, there are 1,600 lakes. It's not just 3 of those big lakes. So I am seeing that decline big time on the under $1.5 million range.
So the big luxury ones on the 3 big Muskokas, are they not going down 30% as well?
They're not going down as much, but they're also not selling. So I feel like the people that do have those properties aren't as desperate to sell. They're just on the market and they're sitting there. So a lot of us joke that we're just collecting listings. Which is great for, I guess, promotion and to say I have a lot of listings right now. But
you got to sell them to make some money.
This stuff doesn't pay. You got to pay the bills, right? You got to keep the lights on.
So you said that this was coming down for a couple of reasons. Number one, that people just don't like the Muskoka or cottage lifestyle. But if you bought initially, one would think you liked the cottage lifestyle. So that's kind of strange. Second is you said people that had bought for investment purposes. Did people buy cottages for investment purposes?
Most people bought cottages for investment purposes. Most people, because they saw the value. I mean, people were renting out here and people were getting $10,000 a week. It was crazy. Even on places that weren't even that nice. People were getting a lot of money in the rental.
But you could only rent for 2 months.
That's not true. You can rent all year round, and people were renting all year round.
Not for $10,000 a week in the winter or the spring.
Fair enough, but I think the winter lasts a longer than 2 months. It does start up here May 24 and typically ends after Thanksgiving weekend, and actually the weekend after that because it's the big cranberry festival. So there's a lot of unique times to come here. I mean, some people like it here more in the fall because of all the colors and the hiking. So there was a big demand for that rental vacancy rate up here.
I hear that some of the municipalities are restricting or outlawing Airbnb in rentals. Is that going to impact the investment opportunity even more?
That already has. So, and what's happening is that you have to get a license in a lot of places to to do a short-term rental. But what's happening is that it's like a 3 strikes you're out kind of policy. So I know right here in Huntsville, I'm actually in my place at Deerhurst right now. And in Huntsville, those 3 strikes could be a neighbor calling the police. And that's considered a strike. So you might have a pesky neighbor that is a Muskoka local that wants you out, and they could probably get you out if they wanted to. It's kind of like the vigilantes around here. So that was causing a lot of stress on a lot of people. It's also financially a burden when you get these sort of strikes on your license. And it got to the point where they were fighting back and they were like, we don't want this anymore. A lot of people that come up here too that aren't really familiar with Muskoka, that were coming up here because they couldn't go anywhere else, they weren't really respecting it like they normally would. There was a lot of parties going on. So I don't blame people for feeling that way. So there's a lot of factors involved that sort of drew up that disturbance and, pushed people out, which means they want to unload their properties.
I know a lot of people that have got, family cottages that have been in their family for generations, and they rent them out because that's the only way they can afford the property taxes, and not one member of the family can afford to buy out the other members of the family.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, Brian, this is still a very good market for rental, but it's not what it was in that boom. So I'm sure your friends or your clients, they have had that for a while. So they're used to sort of the ups and downs, or like you said, the 2 months. They were not used to what they were kind of promised when they got in during that boom. Like, people were expecting that $10,000 a week, or that even that $5,000 a week. And now that they're not seeing this and the interest rates are up, it's just financially unfeasible.
So one of the other reasons that I've heard, I'd be interested if you've heard it as well, is that a lot of people decided that didn't have to live in Toronto during COVID, and so went to Collingwood or Muskoka or wherever to work from home, work from the cottage. But now, when bosses are demanding they come back to work, they can no longer do that, and that's another reason why they're selling out.
All of those factors involved is the reason why. I do have a really cool statistic for you too that I think you might like, for any of the realtors that are listening to your show. It's been a pretty hard year for a lot of realtors because of all of this stuff, like the buyers aren't buying, sellers don't want to decrease their price. So just in the Lakelands alone, which is my board and my area, 35% of all real estate agents have done 0 deals this year. 62% have done 1 or less, and the other percent is just whatever. But I like to talk about that because for encouragement for some of the realtors that may be listening, like, you're not alone, it's going to get better. And for also that a lot of the realtors are leaving the game too, because they got in during this pandemic boom.
A lot of people say that in a housing crash, the first thing to go is the second home.
Yep.
Is this indicative, do you think, that we're in a housing crash?
Absolutely. 100%. We're in a financial recession and we're in a housing crash for sure. However, I don't think it's going to last as long as a lot of people think. I think we are coming around. I mean, we've had 2 interest holds and we're going to get a decrease. We're going to get an interest decrease. I'll say it here. I declare it's going to happen. And when that happens, buyers are going to have a frenzy again, and which is going to push the prices back up. So I repeat, buyers out there, if you can figure it out, get in the market now and get in the cottage market now. You
heard it here from Holly Carroll. How do people reach you if they want to find out what listings you've got and maybe hire your services?
The best way to reach me is actually on my Instagram, because then you get a sense of who I am. You also get a sense of my listings, and that's Holly Ann Carroll. But you can also search the agency Muskoka, and myself and my team are on there.
We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Holly Carroll, talking about cottage real estate. Stay with us, everyone, and obviously the whole real estate market. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got Holly Carroll back from the agency, a Muskoka-oriented real estate broker, to talk about real estate the real estate market, the cottage real estate market, and its impact overall. Holly, just as we were ending, you said that you're convinced that there's going to be an interest rate reduction and that people are going to come back. I'm concerned about that. I think that what's happening right now is we're probably going into a recession. We may already be in a recession, but yet unemployment is still very low. And while inflation has come down, mortgage interest rates alone are adding significantly to inflation. And we've got a challenge having an independent monetary policy because the United States hasn't solved inflation to the extent that we have. And if we lower interest rates, then the Canadian dollar will decline relative to the US dollar, and then we import inflation from the United States, and so it's a challenge. And the yield curve, the long end of the yield curve backed up 2 weeks ago, which says the market is now thinking that interest rates are going to stay higher longer. So if you actually thought that interest rates were going to stay where they are, not go higher, but stay where they are, not being reduced for like another year.
Okay.
I understand that there's a significant number of mortgage holders that come due in the next year. In the United States, there's $1 trillion of mortgage debt that comes due in the next 18 months. So I don't know whether that's anywhere close to the 1/10 statistic for Canada that would be typical, but and I don't have the Canadian statistic, but it makes sense. And we've got more variable rate mortgages in Canada than they do in the United States as a percentage overall. So there's a lot of people that are paying current interest rates. There's a lot of people that aren't, but are going to come due with their mortgages. We have a far higher portion of 5-year mortgages than the United States. And so we're going to have more come due more often than the United States. And so there's going to be a lot of people next year that are paying a lot more in mortgage interest than they have been in the past. And if the past trends are right, that you keep your principal residence, but you sell your secondary residence or you sell your investment property, what do you think happens then in cottage country, in Muskoka?
Well, I think there's a shift that needs to happen anyway. I think that the rates are sort of overcorrecting itself. So I do like the idea of holding the rates. What does that mean for cottage country? That's a loaded question, Brian.
That's why I asked
I
you.
can say what that means to me. Like I said, I think that Muskoka kind of changed a little during that pandemic boom. So it also has to kind of correct itself as well. If we're living in a world where, do we really need a second property? I mean, I shouldn't say that because that's really my bread and butter, but do we really need a second property? I think that if we have a second property that we can give up, then, we're not as bad off as the people that can't even get in the market. I'm more worried about the people, like you said, the housing market, where people can't even afford to buy their first property. Right? So, I mean, for the cottage market, I think maybe it'll flush out a few people and it'll calm down the Muskoka locals where people aren't as renting as much, and it gets back to that charm where it is the family cottage again, or it's families renting up here again. I don't know if that answered that correctly.
So if I'm right,
you're always right, Brian.
No. But if you're right, then people should be buying now. If I'm right, the right time to buy is like next spring. And so let's just go with my scenario for a second.
Yep.
And so if I thought that next spring was the right time to buy, and that all those people that have listed your properties now are going to start getting desperate as they've gone through the fall, and then traffic up in Muskoka quiets down, people aren't coming for open houses, people aren't coming for listing tours, and et cetera. And so therefore 6 months from now, they paid another 6 months in mortgage interest. They're getting more desperate, and particularly if they bought at the height, they're worried they're underwater big time.
Yep.
What do I do to get prepared? Do I start looking now, or do I wait until February, March to start looking?
Well, first I want to address that properties are still selling. They really are. It's not that they're staying on the market for that long. It's just that they're going for a lot less. I don't know who's right, Brian. And I think there's a really good opportunity right now, even if the interest rates hold again, because everyone is going to think what you're thinking. wait to the spring. Wait to the spring to list your place. Wait to the spring to buy. I think it is kind of property to property, because there are different scenarios when it comes to the big lakes. There's different scenarios when it comes to residentials that are also near a marina, and there's difference between the smaller lakes. So I would start now anyways. The fear of buying in the winter is that you can't really see the water. So right now is the time to buy. I don't know if it's going to go down that much by spring, because everyone is going to think the same as you, Brian.
But there's going to be a lot less people that can afford to buy, because interest rates in my scenario are still going to be high, and the mortgage qualifying rate's going to be really tough for a lot of people to borrow. And so therefore the only people, or most of the people that are going to be buying, are going to be cash buyers. And there's not a lot of cash buyers today.
I don't think that's the only reason why people aren't buying. I don't think the reason why a lot of my buyers aren't buying is because they can't afford it. I think a lot of reasons why they're not buying is that they think the interest rates are going to keep going down, or they're going to change, or they're going to hold, or it's going to be better, or it's going to be worse. I think the fear of the unknown is stopping a lot of buyers that even sort of have the money. And like you said,
who wants to potentially lose 10 or 20%?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I've seen so many good deals that I just wish that more people knew about. So I would at least start looking now, and I've seen a lot of offers too go 50,000, 100,000 under. You could always throw something at them, because if the seller is motivated, and there's a lot of motivated sellers that aren't just underwater financially, they want to move too, because they want to move, or they're not well, or, like there's still opportunities out there for you to, capitalize on a lot of things. So I say, look now, and at least watch the market, and then see if Brian or Holly are right. Let us know.
Well, people have been calling for a housing bust for a long time. I've been calling for a housing bust for a long time. And all those people that have been doing that up until today have been wrong. And so the question is it going to happen? And, I think one of the countervailing forces clearly is lack of supply. And,
yes.
and so, we have that, huge demand, immigration to Canada, and lots of people that want to get out of small condos or rental accommodation. A lot of people that want to buy a cottage. There's no question. It's the Canadian dream. And so therefore you've got huge demand, lack of supply. So, that should be good for pricing, and has been incredibly good for pricing in the last decade or so. But the countervailing force to that is high interest rates and a potential of a recession, which logically, the Toronto Globe and Mail had it as the headline on Friday, that the Bank of Canada is surprised that there hasn't been a housing price decline yet. And that's what they were obviously thinking would be triggered by their interest rate declines. Let me ask you about history, if I could. I've interviewed Simeon Papialis, who I think who's a condo, pre-construction condo expert. And he was saying that Toronto is down around 10%, that the 905 is down around 15%, and Cottage Country is down around 30%. And he said that that history is sort of Toronto's under more demand and more supply constraints, and as you go out, you get to this impact of the second investment home that you end up selling in a downturn. In 1990, the last big decline, Toronto went down by 30%, 905 went down by more, and Cottage Country went down by more. What do you think is the sort of the maximum Cottage Country could go down, or has gone down in history? Any idea?
Ooh. In history, or how much more do I think it will go down?
Both.
Historically, I'm not sure. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not really sure. It's a similar reasoning, obviously, interest rates and recessions. I think that it will continue to go down, especially over the winter, and especially over the next 3 months. We could see 40%. I did notice a little bit of hope for, I even saw multiple offers during this fall. So I could argue either side. I'm not even sure. I can't even answer that, Brian. I don't want to get in trouble. I still want buyers to come through this.
Okay, so let's talk about the different market segments, if we could, then, for a minute. You've on several occasions said that the three big lakes versus other lakes are
Yes.
different, and that high-end luxury versus million and less are different, and close to marinas, which I found interesting. And I presume islands versus road access is different too. Tell me about the different market segments and what's happening there, because logically, it should be the low end of the market that's more impacted. Is that what's happening?
That is logically, but okay. So the lower end of the market on water has a more impact on the decrease of prices, but those are the ones that are actually selling. The luxury market 3+. Now they're still selling, but they're not selling as fast, and they're staying on the market a lot longer. And I have noticed them still on the market for, 3 to 6 months. Island properties aren't really selling because people saw them go for 500, 600, 700,000 during the pandemic, and now they're worth next to nothing because people can now get a cottage for $650 on land with road access. So those ones will just take right out of this equation. The luxury market is suffering. It really is. However, I mean, it's suffering in the term of it's not really selling. And then in terms of the lower end is suffering in terms of price. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
And what about, some of these developments? You said that you're at Deerhurst. There's been a lot of sort of, I don't know what you call them, condo developments. Tell us about some of them and what's happening with them.
Absolutely. So they're in the same boat. I showed a few places in Deerhurst as well. For example, a beautiful condo in the new building that's just in Deerhurst here would have went for $825 in and around Waterview. It is now listed for $565. So again,
that's a huge decline.
That is a huge decline. There's a place actually that kind of looks exactly like my condo. It is listed for $389 and it's still not selling. And I think the biggest thing is what agents are doing is they're lowering the price, and it's like holding a falling knife. They keep lowering the price and lowering the price and lowering the price. And it's not the price. It's the scared buyers or just the unknown of the buyers. It's not necessarily the price. I mean, they are listing a bit high. I also heard a statistic that from January until October, almost every single on a majority range were listed higher and sold for so much lower. October, we finally got it and we started under listing again, and it started to go a little bit higher for list price. So that's just crazy when I think about that. So we're just finally adjusting to the price as realtors and actually listing it for what it's worth or under what it's worth, so that we can attract a lot more people to this area. But the seller has to agree, which I think was the hardest thing, was to manage those sellers' expectations. And it took us all the way to January to get it.
If you've had a 30% price decline, there's got to be people that bought last year that are underwater today.
Yeah.
Where their cottage isn't worth the debt that they've got on it.
I feel so bad for the people that bought last year and are now having to sell. The people that are winning are the people that bought so long ago and they want to move anyways. But anybody that bought last year, they are losing money already in interest rates, mortgage, the income that they hoped to get for rental, and obviously all the fees that they have to pay just for doing that and capital gains. So they are losing a lot of money.
What about, and you may not know this because you don't specialize in it, but what about Collingwood and some of the areas that have got more four-season kind of recreational abilities?
I think they're having the same problem. I did speak to a gentleman last weekend at a big open house, and we were kind of switching stories. There was a couple agents from Toronto, there's a couple agents from Collingwood, and myself from Muskoka, and we were swapping stories, and they were pretty much the same. Collingwood also has that resort kind of second property investment, vacation area style like Muskoka does. So anybody that bought in that respect is having the same problems.
It's an interesting situation. And, if you're right, you should be looking and buying now if you've always dreamt of a cottage country property. And if I'm right, you should start looking sometime soon, but not buy until next spring.
That's cool too.
But both scenarios says you got to start looking.
Yeah. I will say too, like I do dabble in residential properties as well. So anybody that it's not their second property, it's their first property, there's also big deals to be had. Like obviously you have to talk to your mortgage agent and figure out the rates for yourself. But if you're thinking of making a move to Muskoka as your primary residence, there are a lot of deals to be had.
Holly Carroll, thanks so much. I understand that you were at a big conference as a speaker recently.
Yes. I don't know if I told you this last time, but at the beginning of the year, I had the dream to speak on stages. I've spoken obviously in my reign for Miss Canada and done some things online during the pandemic. And, I've certainly spoken on some podcasts as well, but actually being on stage and saying my own speeches was a dream of mine. And this was my fourth on stage appearance, and it was the biggest one yet. I shared the stage with my mentor and my idol, Gabby Bernstein. Anybody that knows Gabby Bernstein, she is a force. Dr. Shivali was there, a bunch of big names as well. It was heavy into the health and wellness, but I got to share my story. I know we talked about it a little bit last time, but
maybe we could take a break for some messages and come back and have you tell us a little bit about your story and what you spoke about.
Absolutely.
We'll be back in 2 minutes with real estate broker, specialist in Muskoka, Holly Carroll, with the agency. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've been chatting tonight with Holly Carroll. She's a real estate broker specializing in cottage country in the Muskokas area, but also she always tells me there's 1,300 or something like that other lakes in the area. So I can't just call it the Muskokas. I got to call it wider than that. And we've been talking real estate, but she's got a fascinating personal story as well, a really compelling one. And she's spoken to us about that before, but she got an opportunity this past weekend to speak on stage at a big conference about her story and about some of the things that she's found out through some of the challenges that she's encountered in her life. She was Miss Canada Tourism at one point in time. She's been an actress. She's been a model. She's been a world traveler. And now she's in Muskoka, trying to help our families realize their cottage dreams. So Holly, tell us a little bit about this conference. What was it called? Where was it? And what did you speak about?
It was called the Auric Living Conference, and it was at Evergreen Brickworks, which is in Toronto. Big names were there, Dr. Shivali, Gabby Bernstein, and I was able to share my story. I talked about sort of a big pivotal moment in my life, which was January 2021. And I was sitting on the beach watching the sunset. And just like any other day during the week, we watched the sunset and everybody lined up to do the same. And the problem is that I couldn't see the beauty in the sunset. I was hungover, strung out, riddled with anxiety, depressed, and a pretty bad emotionally and verbally abusive relationship. And I was just in tears. And I thought to myself, how did I get here? And in big, bold letters across the sky, I saw, Holly, you need to quit drinking. And this was something that I had heard for years before, but wasn't like as strong as it was then. And from that day on, I knew I had to change. I got help, as I mentioned last podcast, and I began the journey through integrity, self-worth, building my life back. And I realized that, it was time for me to take responsibility for the position I was in, for the bad relationship I was in, for the success or lack thereof that I was in. And I'm a firm believer that you are the creator of your life. You are the designer of your life. And, I was the reason for all of that. So I got to share that story. It was a tearful story.
Did you go to rehab, or what was the way you got out? How did you get out?
Yeah, so I didn't have to go to rehab, which was great because my brother is actually 8 years sober now, and he takes people through the program of AA. And so generally, I mean, if you're in a really bad situation, that sometimes what you need to do is go to detox and then you go to rehab. I didn't feel I needed that, but I certainly needed to be removed from the situation that I was in. So I kind of stopped everything and moved in with my brother for 3 months. And I started the program. I got a sponsor, and now I sponsor women in the same space. And I've helped a lot of women get sober. But it's not just that. It's not just putting down the alcohol. It's becoming the person that you're supposed to be and figuring out why you drink like that in the first place. They say that alcohol is just a symptom, and it is fully. I don't.
Why did you drink?
I had a lot of issues that I just never dealt with. I was more just like put the mask on and be happy. But I never faced any of the issues. And I mean, everyone does. Like, it's not that my issues were that much bigger than anybody else. I'm sure, and not to be unsensitive to anybody that probably went through maybe something even harder than me. But the thing is, we all have to face the traumas that we had growing up. We all have to face that, whether it be a child of divorce, whether it be, actual sexual abuse, whatever it might be, we all have to face it. We can't stuff it down. And I think that's what I was doing. I also, through my whole modeling career, I developed this weird feeling and currency, which was my looks, and looks had become my currency. And so I never developed that potential that I had inside. And what happened was I was surrounded by a bunch of people that just kind of used me for my looks. And I convinced myself that that was fine. Well, go on with a couple of years of that, and just being around people that didn't see your worth and you didn't see your worth. Eventually that's going to catch up to you, and that caught up to me.
You said you were also in some bad relationships. How did you end up in those? Like, you seem so confident and so self-assured. How did you end up in these abusive, bad relationships?
Yeah. And I don't think I knew my worth back then. And, that was part of me that was unhealed. So I was attracting those men. Throughout the process, I realized that, I always wanted more love from my father. I was raised by a single mom, and I loved my dad. I love my dad now, but he wasn't really around. And I think that sort of trauma festered over my life. And so I looked for men that were unavailable, abusive.
You looked for men that were unavailable and abusive. You looked for them.
Subconsciously, I did, not consciously. So subconsciously, I was attracting these men. And the reason why was because if they loved me, then somehow my father would be around and love me more. And I know that's a little bit deep, but I realized that was the whole situation. And there was, a lot of wounded masculine energy inside of me because of that. So that was almost part of my love, that abandonment and that sort of emotional abuse was sort of the love in a twisted way that I didn't get from my father. And I know that sounds really crazy, and there's a lot to unpack there. But all of those things that I was attracting into my life, people that party, people that drank, like now I don't even hang out with those types of people. I have a beautiful relationship now. So all of those things that I was attracting back in the day when I was in that realm were just a piece of me that I hadn't healed.
So I've seen posts of you canoeing in Algonquin Park and traveling through the Rockies. Very outdoorsy life. It seems like a very different life.
It is. And it's a wonderful life. I see the beauty and the passion in everything. And going back to how I started this story with the sunset going down, I mean, those are my favorite things to watch now.
So the 3 months with your brother
Yes.
and his version of AA certainly seemed important. What else? What else were the things that got you to where you are today?
Well, I got a coach. I got many coaches. And I've pretty much had a coach in all directions. So I've had a real estate coach. I've had a life coach. I've had an intimacy coach. I've had a feminine awakening coach. I've had a relationship coach. I pretty much took a deep dive in personal development. I mean, you want to talk about anything, Brian? We love to do this.
Okay, so let's go through it. So what is the intimacy coach teach you?
Yeah. So because of, the alcohol abuse and the partying abuse and being around these men, you don't know your own worth. So intimacy kind of becomes less important, if that makes sense. It does. So you don't, I mean, anybody that's drinking and intimate, it's not the same, right? So the more you do that, you become desensitized. And so you almost have to develop that again. I think because most of my growing up, especially as a model, during intimacy, I was tipsy and I was having a couple glasses of wine. So I had to almost go back and relearn all of that and appreciate all of that. So that was the intimacy coach one. What's
Okay,
next?
and you said a feminine coach? You don't need a feminine coach, do you?
I know. So, well, you might think that feminine is how I look. It's actually not. It has everything to do with actually the core wounds that you may have wounded. So oddly enough, I used to be extremely masculine in my energy. And what that means is masculine energy is doers, they're action takers, they're aggressive, they're hustlers. And that's how I thought that I had to be successful. And I was almost threatened too by men that were around me that, were more successful because then they would want me to be in the kitchen. So I had to do a lot of work on healing my wounded masculine and also my wounded feminine. So somewhere along the way, I actually lost respect for that feminine energy, which is nurturing, caring, gathering, that the action piece of meditation, or so a feminine would be meditating and allowing. And so there's so much work that I had to do in these types of polarities and balance between the masculine and the feminine. That's a whole nother podcast, Brian.
Sounds like it. Okay, what about the relationship coach?
And the relationship coach was because I had to learn that I had a lot to do with the relationships that I was in. So at first I was blaming the other. I was blaming my boyfriend. I was blaming my ex-boyfriend. Like, they're abusing me and he shouldn't talk to me like that. Well, really, I was allowing it and I was accepting it. So I had to really see my part in that. And even going back to the masculine and the feminine energy, I had to allow the man to step into his masculine as well and be more feminine.
You had to become more feminine, or they had to become more feminine.
I had to become more feminine, believe it or not, Brian. I had to become more feminine. I was, and I mean energetically. So there was little things that my ex would do. Like, he would ask me if I would like something from the kitchen. I'd be like, I'll get it for myself. Like little things like that. I didn't realize that I was doing, which actually wounds his masculine. So there was just a lot of things that I learned that I was doing that were actually counterproductive.
Okay, so other than getting things from the kitchen on your own today, what do you do differently today than you did a couple of years ago?
Well, I do a lot differently. But to name a few, I allow people to be expressive. I allow people to be who they are instead of taking it so personally, instead of feeling like I'm personally attacked. So for example, like if my boyfriend is upset, I will let him be upset and it's not directed to me. I think a lot of times in the past too, that I thought it was directed to me. Like if he ever raised his voice, it was because he was raising his voice at me, So in the process of me allowing him to be a bit more expressive or just have a fucking moment, excuse my language, he'll calm down and he'll speak to me with respect because I can hold space for him now. I'm not just this wounded bird that is emotionally wounded, and I think that I'm being attacked all the time. So that's one thing that I do different. I'm a little bit softer in my approach as well. I was hard before because I thought that, again, I was being attacked. I also let him get the door for me all the time. So whenever we're walking up to a building, I hope he's not watching this, I slowly go a couple steps back so he can open the door for me. He doesn't even know I'm doing this. This is a great tip for all you women out there. And subconsciously, he just feels like a man. And I think a lot of women don't realize that they need to let go of their masculine a little bit if they want a big masculine man. And who doesn't want a big masculine man?
I thought females all wanted this empathetic, nice guy these days.
Well, we do, but I think what's going on is that they're wounding the masculine in the process. So we definitely want it emotionally available, but don't get it twisted with actually wounding this masculine man and turning him into someone that he's not.
So you had the AA coach, your brother. You had the intimacy coach. You had the relationship coach. You had the feminine coach. Any others?
Yes. So I've actually had a big mindset coach and a real estate coach, of course.
Okay. So tell me about the mindset coach.
Yeah. So I've had a few of those. So I started training under Kathleen Cameron, who is absolutely amazing. She taught under Bob Proctor. I'm sure you know who that is. And that's all about thinking into results. So believing that it's yours before you have it. So I'm a firm believer that you have to see yourself successful. You have to see yourself happy. You have to see yourself wealthy. You have to see yourself healthy in your mind first before it actually happens. And that's why a lot of people don't lose weight and they do all these exercise programs, but they don't lose weight or they gain it all back because they actually still see themselves as someone that's overweight or someone that's successful, or for example, someone that wins the lottery and a year later they lose all the money, because it's a consciousness and a level of thinking that you have to raise. For example, to be successful, to have a lot of money, you have to become that person first. That's a big thing. A couple of the women that I've met during the program and who took the program, one of the women actually became my coach as well. So we coach each other. We meet every single morning from 6:30 to 7:30 and we coach each other. We help each other prime for the day. We're actually writing a new book and it is called You've Got the Magic Ink, Girlfriend, and it's a workbook about all these practices, all these modalities, all these stories that can help you kind of process your abilities and things that go on and how to rise up to your next level.
You talk to her every morning from 6:30 to 7:30. Every morning.
Single morning, Brian.
What do you talk about?
So we talk about whatever's coming up. So we're usually studying something, whether she's studying Dr. Joe Dispenza, whether I'm studying Gabby Bernstein, whatever we're doing. What we do is we meet on Zoom, and from 6:30 to 7, that's study time. Whether you want to do a meditation, whether you want to do a visualization, whether you want to do journaling, or you want to do studying. And then we come on screen from 7 to 7:30, and whatever comes up during that day comes up. If we're having some issues or we're having some resistance to life or somebody's bothering us or we're judging somebody, we talk it out. And the best thing about that is that it's not somebody that we're just going to vent to or bitch to, which is not helpful. It's someone that is actually going to help you through that process. So if anything's going on in my life, I'm feeling a little type of way about this. What should we do? She dissects that and we get through it. Sometimes we set an intention for the day, all different things.
Sounds like we got to do a session with both of you.
Yeah, I would love that. And the book's going to be ready soon, so we can even talk about the book.
Sounds fantastic. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Holly Carroll, the Muskoka real estate broker that you want to hire, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's really been fun chatting tonight with Holly Carroll. Started out talking about the real estate business because she's the real estate broker with the agency, specializing in Muskoka Cottage Country real estate. And we've talked about what's happening in Cottage Country, 30% price declines on average. She thinks that now's the time to look because prices are never going to get better. I think maybe we're 6 months away from that, but you know what? Who knows whether we're at the bottom or close to at the bottom? We're down, and that's an important finding. And then she's really shared with us a bunch of the really important things that she's done over the course of the last couple of years to become the person that she is today. And I think that is actually an even more fascinating conversation. So I really thank you, Holly, for sharing some of that with us. You said that you wanted to plug a couple of things that you're up to. Tell us what you're up to, sir.
Thank you for all of that. And thank you for chatting with me as well and having me on again. So I was in a very powerful mastermind this year. I started it in January and it completely transformed my life. And it's given me the courage as well as the opportunity to start my own. So I would like to start my own powerful mastermind, but for realtors. So any realtors out there that are already pretty successful, but maybe have plateaued. And what we'll do is we'll jump online and just help each other grow. I'm also starting a mentorship of my own for younger women, or sorry, not younger women, but women that are just getting into the real estate world and need somebody to sort of help them through all the trials and tribulations and the mindset and all of the above. So I'm starting that, and it's going to be an intense 90-day blitz after New Year's.
Fantastic. And we're going to do a session about your book when it comes out or before.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Please.
If people want to contact you because they want to take a look at some Muskoka real estate, how do they best do that?
Best way is on my Instagram, which is at Holly Ann Carroll. And if you don't remember that, you can always go on the Agency Muskoka website. The Agency Muskoka website, or Holly Ann Carroll. Holly, thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit about the cottage real estate and more importantly about you and your journey, because it's inspirational. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Brian. That's our show for tonight. Thanks to everyone for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Huntsville or Muskoka or Deerhurst at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody.